When I was at school, probably 15, 16, a relative of mine was the bass player in a band called Judas Priest, the very early Judas Priest, before Rob Alford and all the other guys now. He didn't live very far from me, so I used to visit quite often, meet the guys, and then I started to go on a few concerts with them, just small shows in clubs and bars, basically to lift the equipment around. But the whole time I had an interest in the more technical aspects of the industry. And when I left school, I went to work for a steel company called British Steel Corporation as an electronics engineer. Whilst I was doing my apprenticeship, I always kept doing small concerts with the small bands. And of course, the more qualified that I got in the electrical world, the more useful I was to the bands because I could fix the equipment. But I always had a leaning towards sound, even though I did lights as well. It just was really a natural progression, doing more concerts. And then I started working for a local band that had its own PA. I met a guy who was doing lights at the same time, and we'd both turn up to do the same gigs. And he said, "Do you want to start a lighting company?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." But my interest was always in sound. So in the way of doing lights and meeting all the other sound companies, I met bigger sound companies, and I started to do casual work for a company called TechServe. And TechServe was owned by a guy called Bob Doyle. Bob Doyle later became one of the owners of Digico and started that company, but he was also the managing director of Midas Consoles. Well, he was asked by a manager called Peter Mensch, who managed Def Leppard at the time, whether he had one of his engineers that could turn up at Birmingham University and mix a new band they just signed called the Armory Show. Now, the Armory Show was ex-Susie and the Banshees and the Skids and Machine and all these other sort of bands around big country time. And I went and did that concert. And after that concert, I was about to go home. And the manager guy goes, "Well, are you ready?" And I'm like, "Ready for what?" And he goes, "Well, are you ready to go on tour?" And I'm like, "No. Well, I got my motorcycle outside and I don't have any clothes or anything." And he was like, "Well, you better go and get rid of your motorcycle and get some clothes and come back." I worked for the Armory Show for probably 18 months, 2 years, and Peter Mensch liked me and liked what I did. And he said, "We've just signed a new band called Metallica." I was like, "What is it?" And he goes, "It's heavy metal." "Well, what's heavy metal?" And he goes, "Well, you'll find out if you do it." Because obviously it had only been rock bands up until that point, you know, heavy metal was very new then. So I said, "Yeah, okay." We started November 1984, and that started in England. They rehearsed here, and then we went out on tour in Europe. Just me and one other guy with a TechServe PA. We did really well. I could sort of see that the band, it was something special, because it was one of the very few times I'd worked for a band that we would turn up at the concerts to load the equipment in, and there would be fans outside already in the afternoon. Now, how many times do you see a line forming round the venue for a band that's playing the local bar? It made me think, oh, okay, these guys are quite popular. So we did the tour, and then got on great with the band because they're really nice guys. And they said, "Well, do you want to be our engineer?" And I'm like, "Well, what does that mean?" Because I'd never really been a band engineer. I'd always been a system company engineer. So they said to me, "You want to be our engineer?" I agreed, yes, okay. And they said, "Well, we start," I think it was in Boston. Now, I had been to America before because I also used to do a lot of punk bands. I did GBH, Exploited, Discharge, and English Dogs. So I did a lot of the punk. And of course, Metallica really liked the punk. So the fact I did those guys kind of put me in a good position for doing Metallica. So that's really how I got started as an individual. I just paid attention and learnt as much electrical information as I could, because that's obviously very useful for what we do, and went from there. I've always tried to keep up with technology. I wasn't a person who sort of went, okay, that's the way this sounds, this is how it's going to stay. We've always tried to move on. You know, the band and myself, we've always tried to make things even better all the time. it's a constant learning experience. You never know everything, and something always new comes along, and it's more now I can embrace the new things and learn from them, as opposed to them being scary like they were in the beginning. You know, the first time, you know, you go from doing a venue that holds 2,000 people, and then all of a sudden you're in arenas doing 20,000, and then you're outside doing festivals that can be 80, 100,000, and then the one-off that we did in Moscow, which was supposed to be 1 million people. And I mean, each one of those is a little nerve-wracking. And even now, I'd be lying if I said that when I walk out into a full stadium, that there's not a little bit of apprehension about it. You still feel it. Through all the early years, of course, I was still working out what the band should sound like, because we were formulating the sound of Metallica. You know, that they did what they felt musically and just played, and at the same time I'm trying to work out, well, what should this sound like? It's more deliberate now. You know, if we talk about something now, we're more deliberate about it. In those early days when we were young, we were just doing what we felt. You know, when you've got some guy playing double kick drums, you know, if you did what it said in the name, bass drum, and you just had bass and no treble, then you just have a big rumble sound. And then we started to learn that we needed to add high end to the kick drums to make each time you hit the different ones, you could hear them both working. You know, it didn't become just a droning bass sound. Most bands don't really know what the overall sound should be, I don't think. I mean, the studio albums are one thing, and what you can actually reproduce live is another. Capturing the attitude of a band live is so different to the studio vibe. I've just tried things. Obviously, many years changing microphones, changing how many mics are on the snare drum from 1 to 2 to 3. You know, how many mics in the kick drums. All that changed. Everything changed out of necessity, out of the fact that there was a problem with that particular input. It needs to be better. How can I make it better? And we've just done that with Metallica for 30 years, and we still do that. I still change things even now. I've always maintained that I am an employee of the band. You know, a lot of people go, oh, you're the fifth member and all this. No, it's their project. I work for them. They pay me wages, and I treat them with the respect that deserves. They're my friends. Of course, they're my friends. I've known them for 30 years. You know, in the very early days when we used to go on tour, like for the Black Album was 3 years. I don't think we did a tour shorter than 18 months. It never works, the really close friendship thing with people you work for. I see so many people try to get close to the band because they think that that's what they want to do. They want to be the friends, but you can't do that. You can't force that to happen. You're either friends with somebody or you're not. You're not going to be an engineer, that kind of thing. And you know, we all answer to the fans, including the band. These people come to our concerts and they spend an awful lot of money on those tickets. They don't get any cheaper because it's so expensive to move equipment around the world, and all the people and everything we need. These people have worked really hard to come to that concert, and I want them to have the best possible experience. I want them to hear Metallica and enjoy it and be moved by it. You know, not just some throwaway concert. We've never done that, and the band are not of that attitude either. They want every concert to be absolutely right.